Welcome back to my shop. This is Larry Sefton, and what I'm going to be doing is putting pyrography on this hollow form that I had previously made. If you look, you can see that I put guidelines on it, and the guidelines are just because I'm going to be trying to do them in a perfectly circle to go around it, rather than a total random pattern. I'll probably be starting in the middle on this hollow form, and what I'm going to be doing is using a this particular brand right here. It is 12 gauge, I'm sorry, a spiral, Nautilus type spiral. So that's what I'm going to be using to pyrography this. And before I get started, what I usually do is test it on a piece of scrap wood to make sure it's doing what I want it to, and make sure it's up to temperature. And before I go too far, I need a brush. So let me stop and get a brush. And the brush that I use is just like this. It's just a real fine brass brush, and that's to make sure I keep the tip clean. It'll build up with ash and creosote and won't make a good brand if it does that. You'll notice a couple things regarding how I do this. I do have a foot pedal down here. I don't know whether you can see it. That is my dead man switch in case I get up. I typically start off on a piece of scrap wood to make sure that it's working correctly and doing everything that I want. I should turn it on, and it'll take a while for this to come up to temperature. Once it stays up to temperature, it will hold very, very well. While it's coming up to temperature, you'll see a couple things. I wear a heavy-duty gloves. These are the just rubber gloves, and the reason for it is that whenever you're burning like this, you get a lot of soot and smoke, and your hands will stink like anything, and your wife or somebody else will tell you that you've been out by a campfire. You'll see now that it's up to red hot. And the other thing that I have and I'm doing that you can't see is that I have a pair of sunglasses on. They're a high-end Ray-Ban type sunglass, 100% UV. And the reason for it is whenever this flashes, at least for me, I recently had cataracts removed, and everything is a lot brighter. And if you don't wear sunglasses when you're doing this and it flashes and you're doing it for a long period of time, the next day you'll probably find that your eyes are itchy because you have a little bit of welder's flash. So let's just test this to make sure that it's working and that my my ventilating system here is working. It's a homemade ventilating system, and it's on a low power, but it just vents to the outside of the house. I don't try and filter it. And let's see if it's working. And you can see that it's going to do a pretty good job. And you get a nice deep brand. So let's go ahead and get started. There's not going to be much talking through this. Again, I start in the middle, and that's so that I can move in any one direction. And if you start at the bottom and work your way up, you're off quite a bit whenever you usually get to the top. So I usually start at the top. And in this case, I'm going to try and keep this point here at the top of the Nautilus all at the top. So I'm just going to start off right here. And I think I want to turn it up just a little bit. I tend to overlap them a little bit. And this is really all that you do. You sit here and listen to your favorite audiobook or music and just go ahead and kind of chill out. Again, this particular brand or point is 12 gauge. When you're putting this much heat onto it, sometimes you actually have to stop and let your piece cool down a little bit. Otherwise, you'll find that it'll dry out too much and actually crack on you. The next step in the process is to brush it and get all the carbon and soot off of it. And for that, I use a very soft brush. It's a brass brush. It's a jeweler's brush. And it's gotten from Rio Grande. And they're about $9 a piece. They come with a long handle, but I cut the handle off because I don't really use the handle for anything. So next thing, like I said, is to brush it off. Now you'll see that I'm doing it next to the vent here. That's because there is a lot of dust that comes off of it. And if you don't wear a mask or something, it will go up your nose and you'll have a lot of carbon in your nose. So make sure you put it by a vent of some kind. And you got to brush it pretty hard. And if you look real close, you can see it, how it comes off. And you can, if you look, you can see it coming off there. So you want to brush it real good. If you look, you can see just how deep that pattern really is down in there. The next step in the process, and we'll go down through each one of them, is to blacken it and put black on the inside. I tend not to use a water base on the inside. I use a spray paint of some type, and the reason for that is that if you put too much liquid on the inside, it doesn't want to dry as well, and it'll sometimes expand the wood and actually crack it. So what I do is I just use something like this spray paint right here, and I just go and I put a little bit on the edge right here, wetting this, and then I just put some on the inside and hold it. And it doesn't take a whole lot of spray to get it in. And then what you do is you just look to see whether or not you got puddles. Sometimes you have to flip it over and run it around, but it usually does a fairly good job of spraying and misting around. So that is what I do with that. The next step in the process that I use is putting dye on the outside, and the dye that I use is this Dick Blick Black India ink. The reason I put the dye on, it gives me a good base so I don't have any major contrast between them. The biggest reason though is if it gets scratched, the black is so deep into it you don't see the scratches, or if somebody chips off a little piece of paint that we're going to put on here later. So it's a lot better to go ahead and put it on and put the black on, and it just work. I've found this just works a lot better. Use this India ink, and what I typically do is just pour a little bit inside a container, set it aside, and make sure to put the top on, because if you don't, you end up spilling it. And then what I do is I just cut a little bit of fabric, not fabric, a sponge. Boy, these are dull scissors. I just take a sponge, cut it up, and use a sponge on it. If anybody's curious, I have paper down on here, and this particular paper is actually a wax paper, and it's great for putting on stuff. Your ink does not go through it. Like I just put that ink down here so you can see what it does, and if I go like this, that paint does not go down through it. So I just thought I would show that to you. That's why I use it, to protect everything. All I do now is just put this on it with a sponge. The next step in the process that I use before I actually put the paint that I'm going to do on it, a lot of times spray it with shellac, and that is nothing more than a real nice sealer, and as most people know, almost all paints will stick to shellac. I would prefer, sometimes I use the non-wax shellac, but I'm not going to be putting this on very heavily, so the paint will still stick to this. So all I do is I just shake up the with the spray can, test it a little bit, make sure it's going, and then I just put a real light coat of shellac on it, like I am right now, and just put a real light coat on. And you can see I even get it on my hand sometimes. Shellac is a very safe product. In fact, they use shellac in a lot of foods, and you can actually eat shellac. For instance, I think it's M&Ms that is coated with shellac. So all this does is seal it real nice, and will allow it to, whenever you go to paint it, the paint doesn't soak in quite as much. So that's the first step. I'll let this dry a little bit, and then we'll go on to the next step of starting to paint it.